best.
This as a solution to the Aboriginal problem. Herd the worst of the Aborigines into one area and put a chemical in their water that sent them sterile. In time, there'd be none of them left. Well, that solution has been put forward by none other than one of the Premier's closest friends, West Australian mining magnate Lang Hancock.
Those that have been assimilated into earning good living or earning wages amongst the civilised areas, that have been accepted into society, and they have accepted society and can handle society, I'd leave them well alone. The ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-caste, and this is where most of the trouble comes, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem.
I was molested, raped. My life was threatened when I was 13 years of age, that if I ever told anybody, the guy told me that he was going to kill me. So what happened was, I went into the hospital to have my son, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and I had bandages on my stomach. Nobody never told me what it was. I got married when I was 18, and my husband and I tried to start our own family. Prior to that, I kept getting sick. I kept hemorrhaging. I kept falling out, passing out, you know, and I kept going into the hospital. And anyway, the doctor told me that I had been butchered.
I don't really know exactly. I have some idea because I have met with many of the twins that there were different experiments. Not all the experiments were the same. But we were used in experiment 6 days a week. Part of it was physical study of twins, naked, measurements, comparisons, to see how we were alike, how we were different, and how close we were to the Aryan race.
Welcome to Terrible Things America Has Done, Part 3. From 1947 to 1948, John Charles Cutler carried out disgusting medical experiments on Guatemalans. Cutler was also one of the doctors responsible for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. The experiments in Guatemala exposed 1,300 sex workers, inmates, soldiers, and psychiatric patients to STIs like syphilis and gonorrhea without their consent. Many of the victims were indigenous, and because of this, Cutler said he didn't feel like he needed to explain the experiments to them. Because he's a racist piece of trash. 83 people died because of these experiments. Spouses and children, many of whom have contracted these infections because of these experiments, have filed wrongful death lawsuits for loved ones passed because of this experiment. The US has never paid compensation for this.
That black women feel less pain than white women is racist. Its origins are too. Let's talk about it. It all started in the 19th century when medical practitioners used to purchase enslaved black women and use them as guinea pigs for their experiments. The first well-known doctor to do this was Marion Sims. He performed genital surgery on black women repeatedly without anesthesia. He described his experiments as so painful that none but a woman could perform them. After these horrific experiments, he founded the first women's hospital, only for white and wealthy women. Despite these horrific experiments on black women, Sims is known as the father of gynecology. He even had a statue in New York. This was taken down due to protests. To this day, this narrative that black people, especially black women, feel less pain than white people still persists within the medical community. It's the reason why more black women die due to childbirth. Now you know.
This is going to be one of the most important videos you watch today, so boost this, share this, everything. You need to be outraged. A whistleblower who was a nurse that worked at the Irwin County Detention Center, which is basically an ICE detention center, just came out and said that doctors are performing mass hysterectomies on immigrant women. They are removing, quitando the uterus from women, and they don't even know it. They're going in telling them that they're sick and they have to remove their uterus, and the women don't even understand what's going on, and they do the surgery. Most of them didn't even need the surgery. Our government is sterilizing immigrant women.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel here. It's Lavender here, and today I want to do a history of this topic and examples of this topic I'm going to be talking about in this video, because not many people know about this, you know, and there's a reason. It's because colonization. They want to cover up colonization and white supremacy and make everything so perfect, and I just think it's wrong for them to censor the truth. So I decided to make this video, so let's get started into this video. So yeah. So the world as a whole pretty much has a very long history of racism, and this history becomes more complex as time progresses. One consistent factor of this racism in the United States and other countries is the efforts of white people to control the reproductive rights of people of color in particular, from the kidnapping of Native American children for white families to the acts of abuse against black slaves by white slave owners, the forceful sterilization of disabled people. People of color have repeatedly had their reproductive rights violated, throughout history. Much of this violence derives from the beliefs of white supremacy and colonization, which perpetuates the notion that the lives of people of color are less important than the lives of white people. By the way, all my evidence and all that will be in the links will be in the description down below of this video, so check them out if you want to. So yeah. So first we're going to start with the racist experiments on people of color, and I'm going to give some examples of that. So yeah, there is a lot of racist history surrounding this topic. Some examples: Dr. J. American Sims is known as the founding father of genealogy. He earned this title through contributions made by experimenting on enslaved black women. Sims went on later to offer the procedure that he did on these enslaved black women without anesthetics, and he opened up a facility in Europe to wealthy white women who were sedated, and had anesthetics. Sims is known as the founding father of genealogy, but he has a horrible legacy behind it because he was operating on enslaved women who couldn't consent to this, and he didn't have any type of pain relief or anesthesia during and afterwards. So these people would wake up, the slaves would wake up in severe pain. Some almost even died. A victim of his is known as Lucy. She was an enslaved 18-year-old girl who almost died after Sims operated on her, attempting to fix her postpartum urinary incontinence. One enslaved woman, Archa, was another victim of his. She endured at least 30 painful surgeries throughout her time with him. And this doctor, in 2017, the name J. Marion Sims made headlines when someone spray painted the word racist on his statue in New York City Central Park amid nationwide calls to remove monuments to people with ties to the Confederacy. The following spring, city officials took down the statue. These women were considered property by white people and the system white supremacy. These women could not consent because they were slaves. These women also had value to the slave owners for production and reproduction, because slaves were routinely raped on a daily basis. How much work they could do in the field, how many enslaved children could they produce? Sims had fucked ideas about the developmental differences between African Americans and white people, namely that African American skulls grew too quickly around their brain, making them less intelligent, which is pure racism because there's no evidence of this. Sims also experimented on enslaved infants that were, enslaved. According to medical journals, The Social History of Medicine, searching for a cure for non-fetal tinnitus, he thought the baby's skull shape could be the cause. So he used an awl, a pointed tool for piercing holes, to forcibly align the bones. The procedure was 100% fatal. So that was one example of this. Another example was the Dr. John C. Cutler was another example. In the mid-1940s, doctors working for the U.S.-funded project injected unsuspecting Guatemalans with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases. Among the infected were soldiers, sex workers, indigenous women, prisoners, and mental patients. Trying to find a cure for syphilis, one of his victims was deliberately infected with syphilis, and months later she was given penicillin. She was described described as so unwell that she appeared she was going to die, and she appeared to be dead looking. Nevertheless, the doctor inserted more syphilis pus infection into her, and she later died from the infection. The doctor kept such poor records on purpose because he knew he was not supposed to be doing these horrific science experiments on people of color. And so he kept the science experiments he did on people and these poor indigenous women secret. The Nazi experiments were another example of this. I mean, I don't even need to explain this. Just look up the Holocaust and all the Nazi experiments on, like, infants, women, pregnant women, etc. Now on to the topic of sterilization of women. Examples: Australia colonialism on the Aboriginals. According to the report, around 10,000 Aboriginals in Australia were killed from 1824 to 1908 in Queensland, Australia. They were considered wild animals, vermin, and scarcely human, hideous to humanity, lonesome, and a nuisance. They were fair game for white sportsmen who thought that they were parasites. Involuntary sterilization of Aboriginal women and children was and is still widespread in Australia. Aboriginal women were labelled by the British occupiers, aka the colonizers, as impure people. This theory justified the sterilization of Aboriginal women in Australia because they were considered subhuman by white people. The United States also has a history of it. Between 1930s and 1970s, approximately 1/3 of the female population of Puerto Rico was sterilized, making it the highest rate of sterilization in the world. Despite the high rates of sterilization, the dark history of these operations remains understudied and hidden in the shadows of history because they want to cover this up. Because the United States and other countries want to look so good. Latina women in Puerto Rico, New York City, and California were specifically targeted by government officials for sterilization throughout the 20th century. Black women have also been the targets of population control and have been disproportionately affected by sterilization abuse. In North Carolina, for example, a state noted for its discriminatory sterilization practices in the 20th century, 65% of the sterilization procedures in that state were performed on black women, even though they only made up 25% of the population. You know, that was how many black women were in the state. You know, there wasn't like a big population of black women. Recent concerns regarding sterilization in the United States abuse involves incarcerated women. A 2013 report found that almost 150 women were illegally subjected to sterilization in California prisons between 2006 and 2010. These procedures were often discussed with women during childbirth or other medical procedures when they were most vulnerable, because, postpartum depression, etc. like that. Tell Us for English did a good article on this. The article is titled, Detainees Subject to Hysterectomies at Private ICE Facilities. Wooten, a practicing nurse of 10 years who had worked at the detention center, blew the whistle on this. And this was all being done while they didn't know what was going on because they can barely speak English because they couldn't understand English that well. The nurse claimed horrific conditions and treatment, including jarring medical neglect, accusing the center of negligence, including poor safety precautions surrounding COVID-19 and genuinely hazardous and unsanitary conditions. Native Americans were also have been known to undergone this in the United States and all over the world as well. Lots of people of color have, undergone this or whatever. Now on to female genital mutilation, a little bit about that and why it's so important that we speak up about this issue. Female genital mutilation is defined as the removal of part or if not all of the female genitalia for non-medical reasons. It is also called female circumcision and cutting. The procedure is most often done to girls between birth and the age of 15. Often carried out under primitive and unsanitary conditions without anesthetic, female genital mutilation can cause severe pain, bleeding, and swelling that may prevent passing urine or feces. In the long term, it leads to chronic pelvic infections, urinary tract infections, and birth complications for mothers and children. The horror of this event, including being physically restrained against their will, affects many women for years in different countries. There are no health benefits from this procedure. It's just done because it's their cultural practice or traditional practice, such as in religions and stuff. Female genital mutilation is practiced in 31 countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia in particular. It's most prevalent in Egypt, Guyana, and Malawi, where 90% or more of women aged 15 to 49 have been subjected to this horrible, atrocious practice. Family or people in power, or anyone that has an influence on someone's life, coerce girls and young women to cut so they will be accepted as clean and ready for marriage. This is very sexist, obviously. In some places, female genital mutilation is relatively a new practice in the area, and that some communities have adopted them from neighboring communities in the surrounding areas. In some cases, it is the revival of old custom traditions. Over 200 million women, have been experienced some form of female genital mutilation. So it's important that we, bring to light the atrocities that are being committed on women and people of color. So if you guys like this video, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Bye guys, see you next video.